So I'm not even gonna lie to you, I have a problem. I bought a lot of books last year. Thrifting books in New York City is the best. It's so easy, it's so cheap, and I know you're thinking New York, cheap? $1. $1 a book. Majority of people give them away, just put them on their stoop because they don't want them anymore. And who am I to not take it? Of course I want to read that book. I want to read every book. So this is where the problem comes in. Last year, I went crazy with the thrifting. It was terrible. Like, it was astronomical. It needs to be stopped. And it has been stopped. However, I now have all of these books that I need to read. After having read 202 books last year, I decided, hey, I'm gonna maybe do it again. But way more physical books than last year. Last year, as many physical books as I collected, I was reading on my Kindle more than anything else. I was borrowing from the library at an insane rate, which is great, but like I have all these physical books that I can't fit in my little tiny 1-bedroom apartment in New York City. So this is the year of reading those. I'm not gonna finish all of them, there's no way, but I'm gonna try. I have bookshelves all throughout my apartment. They're all full of books I've read and books I haven't read. And I would really enjoy to get rid of books that I've read and don't like, or read and I'm fine parting with. I only really want to keep the really, really special ones that I plan on reading again in the future. Let me show you all the books that are currently just sitting on my floor. Probably more than you think. And this doesn't even include the bookshelf up here, the bookshelf behind me, the books on my desk, the bookshelf out there, and so on and so forth. So you guys are gonna hold me accountable. I'm going to read a majority of these books this year and rehome them. Each month, I would love to sit down and talk about all the books I've read. I'm not specifically looking to only read physical books this year. It's not possible for me to only read physical books. Well, it is possible, but I would read a lot less if I only read physical books because I'm on the go a lot. I don't have the capacity to carry physical books all the time. Some of them are really big. So I'm still switching between Kindle books. Also, Kindle has just got a hold on me that I can't break. I have over a 365-day streak. I'm not losing it now, you know? That's what got me last year. It's gonna continue to get me this year, but at the same time, I'm going to read physical books. So the first book I read in January is The Mirror by Nora Roberts. It's the second book of a series, and it's ultimately a series about this girl who inherits a house that is haunted, both good and bad. There are a lot of good ghosts within this house. However, there's one bad one who's just has it out for her and anyone who lives in this house because she believes the manor, the house, belongs to her. I don't really like fantasy books like that. I wouldn't even consider this fantasy, but I really enjoyed the first book. I read it kind of on a whim, and honestly, it was so good. I couldn't wait for the second to come out. Really, really enjoyed it. I also am just kind of a sucker for Nora Roberts. I know people are like, Nora Roberts is for old people. Every Nora Roberts book I've ever read has had me like this. So if that means I'm an old person, so be it. But then you finish your books and you're like, that was crazy and not believable at all. I loved it. So this is kind of the fantasy version of all of her other books, which is still just as good. Next book I've read was The Wave by Todd Strasser. The Wave is definitely meant for kids in like 7th grade. I found this at a book library. I know, why am I getting books from somewhere else whenever I have so many here? I don't know, can someone answer that for me? I see a book, I need it. I got it from a little free book library on the Upper West Side, and I flew through it and returned it. So don't worry, that one's gone. It's out. That's why it's not in my hand right now. Again, it was definitely meant for kids in like 7th grade, but I really enjoyed it. It's very reminiscent on our times currently. I think everyone should read it at least once. It's very informative without kind of shoving it down your throat. Again, meant for 7th graders. But also, I feel like some people could really benefit from reading them. I've also read Beasts of a Little Land by Juhea Kim. I actually listened to this on audio and it was a little confusing. I do feel like books that I listen to on audio versus like physically read, or just like read on a Kindle as well, are harder for me to love because I'm not like fine-tuned in the details. And I get that that's not really fair to each book that I'm reading, but I like to do that a lot with historical fiction because I don't necessarily enjoy reading historical fiction, but I like listening. I really liked all of the characters in this book, but it was very long. There were many different storylines kind of woven into one another. Overall, solid book if you like historical fiction, but I rated it 3 stars, which to me I think is like solid book. I enjoyed it. Next, I read Intermezzo by Sally Rooney. I love everything Sally Rooney. I know she's either like you love her or you hate her. I love Sally Rooney. I loved Normal People. I loved all of her other books. They're all actually like right up here. Beautiful World, Where Are You? I pre-ordered it. And then she like nibbled on the cover, so now I have like a bite missing. Oh look, I even have Mr. Salary, literally like a 30-page book, but was very good. I got this when I was in London. I just really needed a physical copy finally of all of her books. So with that, I read Intermezzo. I was afraid to read it because I was afraid it was gonna disappoint me. Without any spoilers, I think it's a very solid book. I think it's way longer than it needs to be. And how do I describe this? Not my favorite. I personally enjoy her main characters a lot. These two were kind of insufferable. I liked Ivan, the younger brother. Peter, insufferable. Also, why did she write Peter like that? It was so hard to read. And she starts the book off writing it in such a way where there's like no punctuation or like it's just train of thought, and it's kind of unbearable. I was reading it to my boyfriend and he was just like, this is bad. I could not agree more. I'm gonna read a random sentence from Peter. I just switched to a random page. No reply, but she sees the message and then the predictable sequence. The so familiar and by indirectly arousing sentences of sounds as behind the front door she comes up the old basement staircase and into the hall. Classical conditioning. How did it take so long to figure that out? Common sense. Not that. Everyday experience. The relationship of memory and feeling. The opening door. What? What? Why are you writing like that? I know you might be seeing this and being like, oh, like I'm just reading it like that. No, like that's actually the punctuation while you're reading it. All of his chapters felt like that, and then slowly as the book kept going, it was getting better. He was getting better. He was getting more coherent. And I understand that's like the character she's trying to portray for Peter, but oh my gosh, it was unbearable. It reminds me of this book. I'm not even gonna attempt to say her name because I've only ever read it. And I've never heard anyone say it, and I will probably butcher it. This book, such a great book, but the second story of this book was so hard to read because it was like 40 pages of just thoughts. I don't think there was a single piece of punctuation in the entire thing, and I felt like I was going insane. And again, that's the point, but oh my gosh, it's unbearable to read. Like if you don't take grammar seriously, you should read those, and then you probably will, because ugh, jeez. So again, back to this book. Loved the dynamic of the brothers. Loved that she's taking grief and writing about it in such a longer form than most would. But this book did not need to be this long. It's 438 pages. Probably could have been around 320. And then my other complaint was like the end of it, it felt very rushed. Like the end was just like, all right, done. And it was like, well, why did I, okay. So really enjoyed it, also didn't. Next book, A Woman's Battles and Transformations by Edward Louis. I'm gonna say Louis because I believe it's French originally and someone translated it. Tosh Ah translated it. I devoured this book. It was so short, first off. It was like 120 pages, if that. And it was just fast paced. It was almost sort of like a memoir. It's listed as nonfiction. It's a book written by a son talking about his mother and her life and their upbringing and how wonderful she is and so on and so forth. And it's phenomenal. Like I got a lot of perspectives from that book that just kind of I agreed with all along. I always agreed with this sentiment, and it was kind of nice to have it be told back to me from someone from a different country, someone feeling this way. It was very validating to read this book, which was written by a man discussing a woman's battles and transformations and just about women in general and seeing them and understanding them and empathizing with them. Loved this book. This was my first 5-star of the year actually. If I could read it again for the first time already, I would. Next, I read Bridemaid, a memoir. It was sent to me by a publishing company and they wanted me to read it and review it. Enjoyed it. It was a memoir about a woman who had been abused her entire marriage and couldn't see the light of day, was conditioned to just live this way, and then finally figured out how to get out. And it's a real story. It's very moving. It's very hard to read. It's the kind of book where you just want to keep reading and you don't want to stop and you want to know what happens, but at the same time, like you feel guilty because this was someone's life. It is brutal. The things you're reading, they get crazier as time goes on and you can't help but want to jump through the book and help this person. If you like memoirs, and it sounds sadistic, but if you like memoirs about difficult topics, you will enjoy this memoir. The next book I read was A Sunny Place for Shady People by Mariana Enriquez. I've never read anything by this author and I know everyone really loves her. So I really wanted to get my hands on something and I thought, hey, this is a good one. It's short stories. If I don't like it, if I don't vibe with it, that's fine. I'm not normally a fan of books with short stories. I prefer like a cohesive novel. Short stories kind of gives me the vibe of like, oh, it's a chore. It's just not my thing. I totally get why people people love it, but not my thing normally. So I listened to this on audio and I really enjoyed it. There were some that I wish were longer. All of the stories were really good, but there was a lot that I wish were longer. I also really liked that we're reading an author that's not necessarily like United States based. The majority of them take place in Argentina, and I don't know, it was nice and cozy. I loved her writing. I did feel like one of the last stories didn't need to be in there, but maybe it was just personal preference of I didn't really enjoy that story. Like it made it feel like it was dragging, but overall solid. If you like short stories with like some horror aspect, this is the one to go to. There are so many out there that are so great, but this is definitely one of them. My first book from her, solid. Woof. Okay, the next book I read, we need to talk about it. All Your Perfects by Colleen Hoover. The only reason I read this is because I want this thing out of my house. I want this off my shelf. I want this far away. I have read a plethora of Colleen Hoover books. I read It Ends With Us when it first came out. I read Ugly Love, which also just all right. Then I read Verity. I actually really liked Verity. The writing is just kind of shit. We all know that. But I like the premise of Verity, and I'm kind of intrigued on how they're gonna make this a movie or show or whatever they're gonna make with Anne Hathaway. Then I read It Begins With Us, It Starts With Us, whatever it's called, the sequel to It Ends With Us. So bad. Wish I hadn't read that. No. It was clearly like a money grab and it was bad. So I have this book, I read it, and I must say, well, we all know, bad writing. I call these cheat books because what the hell did I just read? But not gonna lie to you, I did like the premise of the book. The book is about these two people meeting because something terrible happened in both of their lives, and they fall in love, they get married, blah, 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 it's happy ever after. Then 7 years later, and they are just like so cold to one another. They're married, but they don't talk to each other. Find out that they're having fertility issues. She can't get pregnant, she can't get pregnant. They've tried everything, she can't get pregnant. It's like overwhelming her, where she feels like such a burden and they can't adopt and they can't do anything, and she just wants a baby so bad that it's breaking up their marriage. I haven't read a lot of books about like infertility based, like the whole book is about infertility, and so with this I do applaud that. However, it's Colleen Hoover who did it, so the writing is brutal. It gets you sucked in, and then you finish the book and you're like, what did I just read? Like, I even had to read the blurb on the back because I just forgot immediately. And I don't forget about books that I read like that, but Colleen Hoover books are just like out of sight, out of mind. I have no idea what I read. I feel like I was in a trance and I couldn't get out until I finished it. And then I finished it and I was just like, thank God I'm done with that. So this is going bye-bye if anybody wants this. Okay, what else have I read? Ribbons of Scarlet by Kate Quinn, Stephanie Dre, Laura Kamoe. I don't know, there are a lot of authors on this book. I listened to this on audio because, again, historical fiction. And it's also so long. It was 16 hours long, and I'm not gonna lie to you, I finished it on audio in 3 days. I just like powered through. Like, I was in it. When I got in it, I was in it. It is a story about women during the French Revolution. It's interesting because it talks about women on different sides of the aisle being like, no, I believe this. And you hear her whole story, and then you're like, this lady's like, that woman sucks, and like I'm on this side and she doesn't want freedom for us. And honestly, my favorite story was the first story in the beginning. I'm not gonna like give out any spoilers, but it makes it sound like it's stories. It's all a cohesive novel, but it's from different perspectives from different women. Again, like different sides of the aisle, different classes. Very good insight. Also had a really long hold time on Libby, so it seems like a lot of people are requesting it. The next book I read was a memoir, which is so interesting. I've already read 2 memoirs. I don't read memoirs like that, so. But apparently this month I am. The next book I read was A Stolen Life by J.C. Dugard. I have never heard of this case. This is a case from 1991 to 2009 about a girl who was kidnapped. She wrote the novel, and she also does the audiobook. If you want to listen to the audiobook instead, she is a narrator as well. And it talks about her time in captivity, what she went through, how brainwashed she was, all of it. And then how she was rescued, and how she has kids, and how she has animals, and so on and so forth. And it's a very moving story. I had no idea any of this happened. I wasn't born when she got kidnapped. I was 14 when she was found, but I had never heard about any of this at all. I hate to like make her life sound so fascinating because it's her life that she lost. Like, it was a brutal childhood from 11 to 29, I believe. Like, I can't ever imagine. I wish the best for her. The next book I read was Bye Baby by Corolla Lovering. Oh, I didn't know she also wrote the book Tell Me Lies. Interesting, because that's on my shelf and I need to read it. It's out there. So this is my first book by this author. I thought it was a solid book. It's fine. It's about these two girls who are inseparable as kids and teens and adulthood, and then all of a sudden one of them is like pushing the other one away, not inviting her to things. They're not really friends anymore, they don't talk, but the one who's pushing her away is also now married to this very rich guy, and she has a baby with him, and she posts online on social media 24/7. So the other one is like hate watching all of her stories and so on and so forth. She's created this narrative in her brain, but they have this big secret between them from when they were kids that they can never ever tell anyone. And so at the same time they have this like unbreakable bond that neither of them are going to break, but this girl's over it, she's done. Altogether a good psychological thriller, but like 3 stars. Sometimes I was like, this is boring, this is long, but other times I was flipping through. So ultimately 3 stars. So the next book I read was The Handmaid's Tale, which it seems like everyone's read this book but me. If you don't know what it's about a society in which women are broken up into like sectors. This woman is technically a surrogate for a woman of power, and this woman is only allowed to cook and clean and so on and so forth. And you're only allowed a certain amount of times to try to have a baby for your boss, essentially, and then you die. So because our times are very reminiscent of The Handmaid's Tale, I decided, hey, I'm gonna finally read this. And I got my hands on a copy of the book. I thought I was gonna fly through this book, but actually it was very slow. A lot happened in the book, but it didn't need to be 300 pages. I'm a big believer in too many books are too long. And like, I get it, 300 pages really isn't that long, but you don't need to tell a story in 300 pages all the time. Sometimes it's just too long. This one, I wouldn't necessarily say is too long, I guess, but I would say is just very slow. Like I'd read 100 pages and like one thing happened because the writing is so descriptive. And I know a lot of people enjoy that and I didn't hate it, but it was kind of a chore to read, and sometimes I'd put it down and be like, whew, okay, I need to do something else, you know? Ultimately, really glad that I read it and finished it, and would highly recommend reading it in our society today. The next book I read was Slow Dance by Rainbow Rowell, I believe that's how you say her name. I have never read anything by her, but everyone raved about this book and said it was the best book, like romance book that they'd ever read. I actually listened to it on audio instead of like physically reading it, and I'm glad I did because the first like 25% of that book, I was not about it. I was like, this is so boring, this is a like young adult novel, why am I reading this? I even looked it up to be like, is this young adult? And I don't know, mixed opinions. Some people say yes, but it's classified not as a young adult. And then the rest of it, I kind of got through it. I kind of got into it and got excited about it and was actually really enjoying it. It's about this guy and this girl who grew up together. They were best friends in high school, and it's kind of just been like back and forth missed chances. Are they ever gonna get together? Are they ever not gonna get together? Are they ever gonna say how they feel? And it's kind of a coming of age story, which is why I think YA is a big factor whenever I was reading it. Like, hey, is this a young adult novel? But no, ultimately it was a good book. I enjoyed it. I wouldn't rate it crazy, but I see why people like it. The next book I read was a book from my shelf, Goodbye Vitamin. It's also Goodbye from my bookshelf because it's fine. I didn't really see the point of the book. I don't even remember what it was about. Like, it was so pointless to read. And granted, it made me laugh out loud a lot. Like, there were a lot of one-liners in there that were really funny, but ultimately not memorable in the slightest. I don't remember anything about it, and therefore I'm not gonna tell you what it's about. You don't need to know, because clearly it's not that important. Don't waste your time on it. And it's leaving my shelf, so forever. The next book I read was The Year of Less. I'm gonna read the whole title because it's pretty long. The Year of Less, How I Stopped Shopping, Gave Away My Belongings, and Discovered Life is Worth More Than Anything You Can Buy in a Store by Kate Flanders. Guys, so good. I would not anticipate a lot of people knowing this about me, but I'm big on like not consuming a lot of things, not purchasing a lot of things. The book problem is the only really big problem I have when it comes to overconsumption. Like, it's bad, but I justify it by thrifting them. Even then, it's too much. And I'm trying to take control of it because it's driving me crazy, right? So I have never read Marie Kondo or any of those kinds of books where it's like, get your life together, less stuff is better, blah, blah, blah. But living in a New York City apartment, I've said that so many times in this video, I'm so sorry. But living in an apartment in New York City, again, you can't have that much stuff. You really can't. It's just, there's nowhere to put your stuff. So when I go to suburban houses and like see friends and see family, they have these massive houses with every room is full of stuff. I'm like, there is so much stuff here. Or if people are like, hey, do you want to hang out? And it's like, sure, what do you want to do? I want to go shopping. And it's like, we are buying clothes at an insane rate. We are buying everything at an insane rate. Like, so I really enjoyed listening to this book. I kind of rented it from the library on a whim. I did an audiobook for this as well, and I listened to it like straight. Like, I don't think I turned it off. It's only 6 hours, it's fast. Really, really insightful, really helpful. There's one thing Kate said in the book that I really think stuck with me, and it was like, in the past, I bought this book because I thought it was something I should be reading to like try to showcase my personality this way. And I realized later, like, I don't care about this book. The premise doesn't interest me. I don't actually want to read it, but because I thought I needed to read it, I bought it. I'm not doing that anymore. I'm gonna read books that I actually want to read, and I'm gonna purchase things I actually need. So I could go in depth about this forever, but we're gonna keep it to books. Very fascinating book. I think everyone should read it. I know everyone doesn't want to come face to face with the idea of overconsumption and having to stop these habits of buying everything on Amazon that you don't need and like buying all this extra stuff all of the time, but I really think it's important for everyone to sit down and read this book. It's just so eye-opening in ways that you probably have never thought about before, but should, for yourself, for your wallet, for the environment, for those around you, for all of it. 5 stars. It was so good. The next book I read was New Animal by Ella Baxter. This is actually my friend's book, and I need to return it to them because I've literally had this for like a year. But this book was crazy. Like, it was insane. It's essentially about this girl who works at a funeral home, and she does the makeup for people who have, you know, recently passed away. She's going through the motions of daily life, and then all of a sudden her mother passes away, and she doesn't know how to deal with the grief. She doesn't want to go to the funeral. She's technically supposed to do her mom's makeup, and she's, you know, coming to the head of all of these things that have happened in her life, and she does not want to deal with it. And so she tries to cope the best way she can, and it's mayhem. This book will not bring you anywhere you think it's going to go, and I would definitely check trigger warnings before you read this, because wild. I remember sitting there telling my boyfriend, oh hey, yeah, like this is what it's about, and he was like, what are you reading? And I was like, that's a great question. I do not know, and I don't know if I'd recommend this book to anyone because it's insane. Very cute cover though. Love the pink. I think that's what drew me to it. The next book I read was Sunburn by Chloe Michelle Howarth. This is a debut novel. I believe it came out a couple years ago, and oh my goodness, it was amazing. It was, I have no notes. No notes. It was beautiful. It was perfect. It's about this girl who grew up in a very small town in Ireland, and she realizes things about herself during her time as a teenager, and she really battles with, oh my gosh, I need to be accepted in this town, and oh my gosh, I need to be who I truly am, throughout her entire life. But the majority of the book takes place in her teenage years, and with her friend group, and with the boy she's grown up with and loved forever. Amazing read. The writing is stunning, the story is perfect, it's perfectly paced, it's perfectly timed. 5 stars. Also, the cover is really nice. Couldn't believe this was her debut. I can't wait to read more from this author. Couldn't put it down. Truly, it was perfection. Favorite book of the month, and it's not close. The next book I read was Less by Andrew Sean Greer. Very popular book. A lot of people seem to have read this book, or at least I see it everywhere, but I've never seen anyone talk about it, and so I was always intrigued. And I have this book, Less is Lost, which is the second book in this series. I don't even know how I got this. I think someone gave it to me for free, and I was like, sure, why not? It's also in like pristine condition. But I've never read it, obviously, because I hadn't read the first one. And I wasn't gonna buy the first one just to read the second one. So I rented the first one from the library, read it, and totally not my kind of book. It's fine, but just kind of pointless. It's about this guy named Arthur Less who travels around the world essentially because his ex-boyfriend is getting married. And Arthur Less is older and feels out of place, and that's why they broke up originally, and so now he doesn't want to see him get married to someone else, and so he wants to distract himself, and all these people are trying to talk to him and get him to come to their country or essentially work, and he's like, I'm just gonna do them all. It's fine. It's very surface level kind of book. Kind of reminds me, in a way, most people aren't going to agree with this, but the kind of style is like Before the Coffee Gets Cold. It's kind of the same vibe of just like surface level reading, and maybe Before the Coffee Gets Cold wasn't surface level for you. It was absolutely for me. I was bored. That's just not my kind of book. I need some grit. I need some deep-rooted trauma. I need to really feel what these people are feeling, and it just kind of felt whimsy and just fine. So now I have to read this one to get it off my bookshelf, and I'm just like not into it. I don't feel like reading it, but I'll get there, and maybe this one will be better. Also, his name being Arthur Less is so strange because I never understood why the title was called Less and then Less is Lost. I'm like, how is Less lost? And now I realize it's a name. So This one's next, eventually, when I get to that. The next book I read was Hope in the Dark by Rebecca Solnit. I was recommended this book all over the internet because, you know, everyone's going through, well, maybe not everyone, but a majority of this country is not loving what's happening, me included. And this kind of tells the story of like hope throughout our political years. But apparently people were saying it gave them hope for a better future and for, you know, the next 4 years and so on and so forth. But ultimately, this book for me was too outdated. It was published in 2005. It's been too long. Nothing is relevant anymore. I understand George W. Bush was a terrible president. I'm sorry, he does not compare to what we have today. And hearing people complain over and over again, not knowing what's to come. Like, obviously in this book, it's a stagnant book. It was 2005 before any of this happened, but it's just outdated. We need a new one. Like, we need one now to discuss what's happened in the past, I don't know, since 2016. So I'd be fine if I didn't read it. I'm glad I read it so I knew, but ultimately it was a drag and I was like, I don't want to finish this. I did, but then I finished it and I was like, what was the point? I should have just like DNF'd. I'm really not good at DNFing, but I'm trying to get better. Actually, that's a lie. I did DNF a book this month and I'm proud of myself for it. And I'm not even gonna mention what it was. Just kidding, it was Pelican Girls. I don't even know the author's name, but couldn't do it. Then the last book that I read for January was Sister Snake by Amanda Lee Coe. Beautiful cover, amazing premise. It's about these two sisters who are originally snakes and they cultivate themselves and they become humans, and it's about their lives as humans and their lives as snakes and how much better they were friends and sisters as snakes and understood each other, but as humans they're complete opposites and they just don't know how to handle themselves over like 800 years. One is crazy, the other one's reserved. That's all I really have to say. The premise is so good. There's so much you can do with this book and I really enjoyed some of it, but ultimately there were parts that absolutely dragged. There was a change in perception multiple times throughout the book, so you had to guess who was talking and guess who was thinking, and it was very confusing. It even took away from the two main characters because you'd even hear from like smaller characters at some point, but for like a paragraph, and you'd be like, what is going on here? And then it would switch to someone else. Was very confusing, was kind of rushed but written too long. I don't know how even to describe that. Had a lot of potential. Ultimately 3 stars, but again, beautiful cover. So I read 20 books in January. I kind of went a little crazy. I don't know if I will consistently read that much throughout the rest of the year, but we shall see, maybe. I'm very excited for February as I am planning to read The Wedding People, which is big and hot right now and everyone's raving about it and I can't wait. I plan on potentially reading We Need to Talk About Kevin, also because this is a friend's book and I want to get it off my shelf. And it's been on my shelf for so long and been a want to read for so long. So if anyone's read this, let me know your thoughts. I don't know what else I have planned, but those are my 2 hopefuls for the next month and I'm very excited to dive into. So I read 6 physical books this month and got rid of 5, which is huge for me. Slowly but surely dwindling down, and I understand people might be like, 5, that's it. Like, yeah, I read a lot of books this month. The majority of them were digital, but 5 is pretty good considering each one is like 300 plus pages and you have to think about how much time I'm at home. Never. So I'm proud of myself. I don't think I'll consistently read as many as that, but you guys are gonna hold me to it. So 5 off my shelf, many more to go. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to give it a thumbs up or share it with someone. Share it with a book lover, share it with anyone you think would enjoy this type of content or just my content in general. It really helps me out and only takes a second for you. I would be really grateful. If you've made it this far, I'm also very thankful for you and hope you found a book that you want to read for the following month. See you soon. Bye.